I welcome everyone viewing this video podcast, but this afternoon I give a very special welcome to four guests. Archbishop Nazar, who is based in northern Iraq, and three others who are based in London, Sarah, Ben, and Brother Johannes. We are gathered this afternoon to speak about the Pope's message for the World Day for Migration and Refugees. And the Pope has written a message in which he has asked us to address two issues. The drama, as Pope Francis puts it, of internally displaced persons, IDPs. That is, those who are displaced within their own country, have been uprooted, left their own homes, and moved elsewhere. And of course, there are many reasons that has happened. Secondly, using the title, "No one must be forgotten," the Holy Father, as ever aware of current circumstances, asks us to keep in mind the plight of those who have been adversely affected by COVID-19, even to the point of abandonment and rejection. And then the Holy Father expands on how we can welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants and refugees with whom we personally come in contact with. And of course, to our four participants, your own involvement places you uniquely in a way that you are able to speak personally about these matters. So I'd like to ask each of you in turn for your own personal reflections on the Holy Father's message to us this year. Perhaps if you could first introduce yourselves and then give us your reflections. Archbishop Nizar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Archbishop Nizar Seman, the Bishop of Hadiab Syria Catholic Diocese in Kurdistan of Iraq. And it looks like this message, it touched me personally, because when you speak about the drama of displaced people, it takes us back to our experience in 2014, when our people, they left Mosul and Nineveh Plain, and for ISIS, when ISIS invaded our cities and villages, and they stayed everywhere in Iraq, especially in the Kurdistan region, for 3.5 years. So it's really a drama to talk about displaced people. I myself, my family, we experienced, my people here, they experienced this, what does it mean to be in your country and out of your home? So for sure, it was a hard experience, but luckily, we have lots of people around the world, and they, by their love, their support, they encouraged us to be able to pass this hard years and to go back to our cities and villages after they were freed from ISIS. For sure, now the people, they went back to Nineveh Plain and they start rebuilding their life again. As a church, we are working in two different directions. We are working with the people, they went back to Nineveh Plain, to Mosul, to other villages, but also we don't forget the people, they decide to stay in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So both of them, we are trying to help the people, they went back on rebuilding, especially their houses, the infrastructures, schools, hospitals. And I would like to say here that a big thanks will be gave to the Catholic organization, charity organizations. I'm not going to mention all of them, but just to say thanks to, example, Church in Need, Knight of Malta, Knight of Columbus, Lovra Doria, SOS, Fraternity, and lots of Italian and other Christian organizations, which make possible to our people to go back their homes and to restore their homes again. The love of these people really make this possible. So we are refugee in our country here, but with the time, I think we are not going to be called anymore refugee because we establish our life here. And this is my diocese. Basically, all my dioceses are refugees people from Basra, from Baghdad, from Mosul, and from Nineveh Plain. I have no one originally from here. All the people I take care of, like 1,500 families, are refugees in the Kurdistan of Iraq, but already they establish their life, they start working here, and they start buying houses here and continue the life here. So that's what we are doing here, Bishop Paul.
Thank you very much indeed, Archbishop Nazar. And it is so encouraging to hear that those who have been displaced, some of whom have returned to their hometowns, while others are content to make their home where they now reside. When I had the opportunity to visit Iraq in 2018, what was very edifying was the position of the church, which was identifying which homes could be destroyed, that is demolished, and which homes could be rebuilt, including hospitals and expanding the university. It was very encouraging to see the involvement of the church, which had great support from the people. Could you let us know, is the church still actively involved in the rebuilding project?
Yeah, the church, it was the first to face the refugee problems from the beginning, and till today is continuing the hard job, really, I'd like to say, hard job on helping people on rebuilding their houses. And all it's through the church, because all the Catholic organization, they work closely with the local church, with the local authority, with the local bishop, to make sure that the houses will be restored. And again, many thanks to this organization. Example, in Karakosh, more than 2,000 houses, they were restored in these 3 years. Many schools and many churches now, we start rebuilding our churches. But was the thing important that, first of all, the church here decided to rebuild the house of the people, the houses of the people. Then now, when we finished rebuilding and restoring the houses, we start thinking on our churches and our monasteries.
Thank you very much, and thank you for mentioning that the support that you have received from the church here in England for the rebuilding project. Sarah, if I could turn to you from the Jesuit Refugee Service, could I have your opinion on the Pope's message and what it has meant to you?
Well, hello to everybody. I'm Sarah Teather. I'm the director of the Jesuit Refugee Service in the UK. For those of you who don't know about us, we're part of an international Catholic organisation set up by the Society of Jesus to accompany, serve and advocate on behalf of refugees and those who are forcibly displaced. In London, we work with around 350 destitute asylum seekers and a similar number of people who are held in immigration detention. And people have a really difficult time in the UK in the asylum process, a really difficult time being recognised as a refugee. And they experience many of the things that the Pope refers to in his message about the experience of rejection, exclusion, abandonment, precarious lives is what he talks about. He talks about COVID being, in a sense, a bit of an equalizer, something that's given everybody a taste of how precarious it is to be a refugee. And I found that quite a powerful message, actually, quite a useful way of helping people to understand what it might be like. There were a couple of things that really moved me, though, about the Pope's message. And I think that the key thing was about his focus, not just on people's needs, but also on the treasures and riches and gifts that people bring. And that's a really important part of the ethos of the Jesuit Refugee Service, is to recognise people as whole people, not just people in very desperate need, which they are, but also people who bring great gifts to the country, to their relationships, people who it's a privilege to get to know. And he speaks in his message about us being called to recognize Christ in refugees and those who are displaced, but how we will be thankful if we do. And he also speaks about how sometimes our desire to serve gets in the way of recognizing people's treasures and riches. And I thought that was a very beautiful way of putting something that has been my own experience at JRS, and I think all of the staff. We try to have more of a community where there are refugees and volunteers and staff together, working together, cooperating together to try and fight for change. And it's the reason I love working for JRS. It's a great honour and a great privilege to do so.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. As you highlighted, the Pope does speak about how we can learn so much from migrants and refugees. I know that for you, much of your work is also concerned with advocacy. Could you tell us a little about how you advocate the cause of migrants and refugees, and what do you find most effective in actually speaking to those who might be dubious of the worthwhileness of working with this community?
Well, I think the important thing is to hear people's real story and to hear people's experience. And it's why I'm delighted that on this panel we're joined by Ben from Refugees Call for Change, who I know you're going to come to in a minute. But Refugees Call for Change is a group within JRS of refugees who campaign themselves for change, drawing on their own experience and the experience of others in the system. And I think their voice and their experience is particularly powerful. But the other thing that's really important for us is to cooperate with others and to work with people, whether they're within the church or outside the church. We're part of a big network of people, particularly campaigning around what's called no recourse to public funds. So people who are left destitute during this period of COVID have really suffered. I mean, they've really struggled. A lot have been made homeless. Many people were thrust immediately into hunger, really struggled to cope. And it's shameful, really, in a country like Britain, that's as wealthy as it is, that in this situation in London, there are so many people and so many people around the country who were hungry and homeless during this phase. So we work with many people. We work with church organisations, and we work with refugee organisations. We work with local councils. We're willing to work with all people of goodwill who want to join with us. Ben,
as Sarah said, we now come to you, and we'd be very grateful if you could tell us a little bit of your own story and your own response to the Pope's message to us this year.
Thank you, Bishop Paul McAleenan, and everybody else. Thank you very much for having me here. I think that this webinar is actually a demonstration of the voice that most of us lack. We have no ways of expressing exactly how we feel and how our own space within the society that we now find ourselves due to crisis that we have run away from. First of all, about me, I'm Ben, as you already know, and I am a Nigerian from the Niger Delta. I'm still in the asylum process, trying to navigate the very complex and difficult asylum process in the UK. In the past 4 years, I heard about the JRS, and I approached the JRS, and they accepted to take me under their wings. And it's been a difference between total destitution and having some kind of support and now a voice. So within the JRS, there is a group I'm part of, we are called Refugees Call for Change. And within the group, we, as refugees, try to identify areas where we think that things need to change. We are comprised entirely of refugees, but facilitators facilitated by volunteers as well. So what do I find about the Pope's message? For me, the Pope's message is almost entirely an opposite of the hostile environment, in the sense that whereas the hostile environment calls for rejection and hostility and discouragement, the message from His Holiness actually calls for welcoming, for protecting, and all the other verbs that I have come to see in this wonderful message, which I find very encouraging, that the Church is leading the way in showing that we all have a common humanity and must be our brother's keeper. So I believe that there is a lot of room, especially within this crisis, to identify the most vulnerable people and the needs of those vulnerable people. Because there is, for many people, we've encountered a problem, a pandemic. So many people, they know at the end of this pandemic what their position is. Most migrants, they don't. Even within the pandemic, the no recourse to public funds, by the way, which I wrote an article about, and it was published in the independent newspaper in the UK, which was titled How It Feels to Be an Asylum Seeker in a Pandemic, which was published by the Independent at the beginning of May. So within the article, I wrote about experiences of some of my friends, and to some extent my experience as well. You know, the fact that the pandemic, even within the pandemic, there doesn't seem to be any discussions considering people who are vulnerable and may find themselves more exposed to this virus. The refugee crisis is ongoing. It's never going to stop. It's never going to stop. And therefore, government policies needs to grow with that. It needs to advance to the point where, you know, we recognize that there are issues that contribute to people to migrate or to run away from their ancestral places of origin. And some of these might not necessarily be, you know, it could be as a result of climate change. It could be as a result of crisis, war. It could be as a result of religious issues. Most Christians in Nigeria are not really free to practice their religion. And so I will, at some point, also say that within the GRS, I have come to witness where we now have a voice, as I said before, in this refugees call for change. And within the GRS, there are other ways, as stated by the Holiness, where we've been, you know, given opportunities to learn new things about our new environment. And this helps you have a sense of belonging. You have a sense that you can at least forget the problems you've come away from and begin to look towards the future.
Thank you very much, Ben. You have identified a number of areas which affect people adversely and displaces them because of religious persecution, and even you've spoken of the COVID crisis, which has affected so many people. At the beginning of your little input, you spoke of your gratitude for having this forum in which you could express how you feel. But of course, that is only one element. One can express, but that expression has to be listened to. Do you mind if I ask, do you find that whenever you tell your story to people indigenous to this country, are you listened to?
I have come to observe one thing, that once you identify yourself as an asylum seeker, it appears that most doors begin to close. And it's not just the doors closing. Most opportunities, well, the doors, people don't want to listen because there is this association with asylum seekers as being people who are here to scrounge on the benefit system, people who are here to exploit, people who cause trouble. And of course, there might be some troublemakers within the migrant community, but that is a totally wrong impression of people who have had a need to move away from danger. And therefore, I will say this, just the fact that somebody has arrived within the shores of Europe, specifically the UK, it doesn't end the problem. Actually, the problem begins from there. I've seen predominantly very unsympathetic response from people, but I've also seen within the UK community incredibly kind people who are willing and ready to listen and to help you move forward.
Thank you very much, Ben, for making that point, which is that your journey and the journey of other migrants and refugees and asylum seekers is in fact continuing. It is not ended once one reaches safe haven. Your journey continues. Thank you for bringing that point out, and please God, that will be listened to as well.
Thank you, Bishop.
Brother Johannes, you're very welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us this afternoon. Perhaps you could tell us your response and reaction to the Pope's letter and your involvement in this issue today.
Thank you, Bishop Paul, for having us and giving us also the opportunity to share these stories and to share the many things that are given to us from refugees. Because my experience has been that in all the years that I worked with refugees is that they bring a lot to us. They give a lot back too in our lives, and that in the spiritual meaning of the word, as also in participating in society. I was for 4 years working in Calais. So from the beginning of the big refugee camp that was called the Jungle until almost 1 year ago. That was a very hard time. The Jungle in Calais was a big camp, and most of you will have heard about it. When that camp started, there were about 2,000 refugees in that camp. And to be clear, the camp started not as an initiative of the refugees. It was the French government that decided that the refugees had to go and live in an area where they were supposed to be tolerated. And that's how France got a big camp. By the end of the camp, around 10,000 refugees were living in the same area. That the campus didn't have any infrastructure. So it's not like some people think there was very little running water. There were only chemical toilets. And all these things, the associations and the NGOs had to fight for in court to get them. And it was quite painful for refugees arriving in Europe and coming to France, which they saw as a country of human rights, to be confronted with that treatment. A lot of refugees would often tell us, you treat us worse than animals. Are we not human? And I think that this is one of the reasons that this message of Pope Francis is so important. I think it's an important message for the refugees because it acknowledges the experiences they go through. It acknowledges what it means to be in that situation. And I think it's also an important message to the church. Because when I was in France, but it's not only in France, it's also here in the UK, when I talk with Christians, when I talk in the parish with people about refugees, it's not always an easy topic to talk about. People have lots of prejudice. And like we heard from Ben, it's not always so welcoming. And I think that's why also it's so important that the message of Pope Francis and the message of the Church in general in welcoming refugees is said even more louder in the Church and in society. Because as Christians, I think we have an important role to play in society in welcoming refugees. It's part of our vocation as Christians, I would say. Nowadays I'm based in London, and I live in the London Catholic Worker, which is a hospitality house for refugees with no access to, no recourses to public funding. So people who live in quite destitute and precarious situations. So pre-COVID, I would say, we used to take in between 16 and 20 refugees, sometimes refugees that were street homeless in the UK, sometimes sent to us by other NGOs. And this is possible thanks to the Archdiocese, because the Archdiocese has made it possible for us to have a building that serves as this welcoming house, this hospitality house. One of the things that touched me in the message of Pope Francis is that we have to meet people. He says you have to know in order to understand. And we have to come close to refugees to understand what it means to be a refugee. Because often in Western society, in our culture, we live in our bubble. We live in quite I would say, a protective environment. And many people in the churches and many people have no idea what it means to be a refugee. And like we heard, people think they come here to have benefits. They come here because they want to profit from our system. And it's as people have no idea what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Eritrea and Syria, the many places people come from. And I think the church can be a bridge between refugees and the local communities, the local people from here. And like that bridge building, I think, is in our society very important, especially if we want to go against the hostile environment.
Thank you, Brother Johannes. You may remember when I visited you in Calais in 2018, you and I went to visit some refugees. You had identified where they assemble. It was a very, very cold morning, and you had made some tea, and we took this tea in containers to the refugees and migrants who were assembled in different clearings around Calais. And we went to one particular place where the migrants had built a little fire with some logs that had been discarded from the surrounding trees. And keeping in mind that these refugees had slept out all night, very cold night, it was now very damp, and you and I approached them, and these young men from East Africa, they rose from their fire and they invited us to come into the warmth. And I think that is a wonderful example of how refugees and migrants never lose their humanity. They have experienced pain, and yet they're ready and willing to share what they have. And that personally was a great message for me, as you so rightly say, we have to get close to people to understand them. And in coming close to those migrants and refugees that morning, we understood their humanity, their hospitality, and how so willing they were to provide a welcome to us. Could I please ask you, Brother Johannes, recently it has emerged that the civic authorities in northern France, in the locality of Calais, have now forbidden NGOs to provide food and sustenance to migrants and refugees who are in that area. Could you let us know how you feel about that and what effect you think it will have on those who are in need of food and drink?
It makes me quite angry because one of the things that I think the municipality is trying to do, so the local authority, is break a bit the bond that is between the refugees and the volunteers who work in the camp. It's not just about the food distribution. It's not just about giving tea. It is about meeting each other, being there together, and sharing in your humanity. And this is one of the things that the local authority always has tried to prevent, because the local authority does not want the refugees, not at all, to feel welcome. And it has been a pain for the local authority that so many volunteers, French, English, and from other countries in Europe, come and help around Calais. We're talking about thousands of volunteers that pass through Calais, I think on a yearly basis. And it is this contact you have. It's, like I said, it's not just about the food. It is about somebody who says hello to you, somebody who wants to speak with you and recognizes your humanity. The problems with stopping the distribution from the NGOs is, so the association that the state pays to do distribution, if I'm not mistaken, is called Association La Vie Active. And there's nothing wrong with their food. I've tasted it, it is quite good. But it is limited in time and place, the distribution. And this association cannot do more than the money it gets from the state. That means that there are places where refugees are, where there will be no food distribution. That means that refugees that say they come back from quite a far distance, there's nobody to give them food. They will have to wait until the next morning, until the official NGO or the official association is distributing food. So it does seriously limit the access of certain groups in Calais of refugees to a good meal. Another problem is that it's not that the women and the children will be served separately by an association or an NGO. So the women and the children will be more exposed to large groups or being in a large group, which is not a nice feeling for any women and children to queue up with hundreds of other people in a large queue. So that's one of the reasons that it's also not good. When you have, like in Calais, 1,000 or more people, refugees from different countries and different cultures, having to live together in the most precarious situation there is, you get conflicts. And the separate food distributions that happen because of the NGOs, they prevent conflict because they do much smaller distributions of food. So they might distribute food for 10 people, for 20 people, for 30 people in different locations. But if you have to queue with, say, 500 people in one area, that's much more susceptible for conflicts happening. So it is creating what we call in England a hostile environment. It is creating and saying, it's Calais, it's the mayor of Calais who keeps repeating the same message, you're not welcome. And that's why it really hurts my heart. It saddens me because we just want to do the opposite. We want to say to people that you are welcome. Everybody is welcome. You are not forgotten.
We have spoken quite a lot about the Pope's message this afternoon. So for the benefit of those who are viewing this video podcast, I would like to let you know that you can access the Pope's message widely available on the internet. And in this year's message, the Holy Father pairs 6 sets of verbs, which are, they've already been mentioned by our participants. You have to know in order to understand. It is necessary to be close in order to serve. In order to be reconciled, we need to listen. In order to grow, it is necessary to share. We need to be involved. In order to promote, it is necessary to cooperate in order to build. So I would like to thank sincerely our 4 participants this afternoon, Sarah, Ben, Archbishop Nizar, and Brother Johannes. Before we conclude with a prayer, could I ask each of you very briefly in turn, in one sentence or in one phrase, could you tell our viewers why you are involved in the work that you do? What motivates you? Sarah?
I feel I'm called to do it, and I gain a huge amount from it. It richly blesses me.
Thank you. Ben?
I've seen so many areas that do need change, and it's being in the process myself. I think that having this voice to call for that change is not only necessary, but it's urgent. It's quite urgent.
Archbishop Nazar?
It fills my heart of joy when I take care of displaced people. So I'm delighted to serve the displaced people, not just in Iraq. I was in London, and anywhere there is a need, I'm ready to serve.
Thank you. Brother Johannes?
It is, I would say, my vocation to be prayerfully present amongst refugees. But the reason I keep doing it is because many times I have met Christ. I have met Christ in my brothers and sisters, refugees. And that gives me the energy and the hope to keep doing it.
Thank you. And just a little reflection, we know the church is very wise and manifests her wisdom in so many different ways, including the arrangement of the liturgical calendar. On the 14th of September, the church celebrates the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. The next day, the 15th of September, we celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. Mary stood beneath the cross. Mary stood beside the cross. Mary stood with Jesus when he was suffering. And to you 4 this afternoon, and to all your colleagues, I would like to say that I too believe that you are like our Blessed Lady, accompanying those who are suffering, accompanying the suffering Jesus. For we believe that when anyone suffers, they are the brothers and sisters of Jesus, as he told us, and you are supporting him. So I'd like to thank you sincerely on behalf of the church for all that you are doing. And to remind all our viewers that this year, 2020, the World Day for Migrants and Refugees will be on Sunday, the 27th of September. Let us conclude with a prayer. Lord Jesus, you too were a refugee who fled persecution with your earthly family, seeking sanctuary in a foreign land. Give us the grace we need to see and understand and assist those who are forced to follow that path that you once trod. We remember too those who have died in that journey towards what they hoped would be a new and better life. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. God bless you all. Thank you.
God bless you. Many
And
thanks
goodbye.
to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.